Well, hello friends, and welcome to the final workshop session of this year's Marbleseed conference. And we are a self-selected group. I know that you are fiercely passionate either about ducks or about vineyards because you're here for this last session. And my promise to you is that if you hang out till the very end, I'm going to ask us to pull out our phones and just Google jokes about ducks. And we'll just tell jokes about ducks for a little while. But in the meantime, I'm hoping to offer some valuable content. My name is Carrie Meyer, and I am a beginning farmer. And we are out in Hutchinson, Minnesota, which is an hour west of the Twin City metro area. And we are on the ancestral homelands of our Wapakute and Mdewakanton neighbors. And my wife and I make reparations through the Indian Land Tenure Foundation. And I invite you to look into that as a possibility for your farm or your community as well. So I'm going to try to honor our time together and the fact that I know that by the time you get to the last slot of the day on Saturday, a number of things might be true. You might be, hearing from family back home, and you might need to get on the road and that sort of thing, or you might know that Pearl Street is open and you have that ticket in your name tag there. But so what I'm going to try to do is structure this workshop today. I'm going to try to give you sort of the most complex information up front in case you are already interested in ducks or grapes, or you already know about ducks or grapes. And I'm going to talk about, first about what we did in this project, what our research questions were, what our methods were, and then I'm going to talk about our findings. And then after that, I'll do some kind of basics about duck management in case the idea is completely new to you. So I'll try to structure it that way so that there's sort of like a cascade of specificity depending on how familiar you are with both of these crops and the possibility of integrating them. But I do kind of want to know who's in the room. So are you grape growers? Is anybody a grape grower? All right, we got some grapes. We got some grapes. Excellent. Some grapes. Sweet. How many of you are thinking about being grape growers? Okay, cool. That's helpful to know. Very cool. How many of you already have waterfowl, namely ducks? Everybody already got ducks? All right. All right, and geese. Cool. How many of you are thinking about waterfowl as a possibility? All right. How many of you are here because it's like for real? Are they like allies? Like they're going to be in like little like elven helmets coming over the hill, like in the last scene of a Tolkien movie, like saving the day as the Japanese beetles come in? Yeah, that's not how it actually looks. But great. So that gives me an idea of who's here. And I'm going to see if I can make the slideshow advance. Is it advancing up there? You want to help me make the slideshow advance? Is it happening right now? Is that working? There we go, now we're good. Okay, great. Just to help you make sure that you're in the right room and you want to, be here, I'm just going to give you kind of the bottom line up front, which is this. I think that ducks in a northern cold climate vineyard is a viable integrated livestock option. I think this is a model that can work, especially if you're already leaning perennial, you're already leaning fruit production, you're already leaning integrated livestock, I think this is a worthwhile practice. We've been doing it for 2 seasons. We're about to do a 3rd research season, and we'll tell you a little bit about that. If you are already a grape grower and you have a successful vegetation pest management program and your soil fertility is pretty good, this isn't something to add for fun. Like if you're already growing grapes and things are working for you, I don't think that the benefits are going to be worth the costs if you have successful either organic or regenerative practices happening in your vineyard. We have, again, this is the too long didn't read version, we have seen some modest improvements in our soil fertility. We've done it for 2 full growing seasons. We're about to do it for a 3rd. We haven't seen any real efficiencies in weed management, but I think we have some pretty weird weeds at our place, and I'm going to tell you why. It is not profitable at our scale. I do think it's possible for this to be profitable at different scales. What's really interesting, and I'll just be upfront about this about our farm, is that we have some of our crops for sale, retail and wholesale, but tons of our crops on our farm are used for the activities of our nonprofit agrarian ministry. So profitability isn't like our #1 goal, but we are not out to lose money. So I can say that at our scale, we about broke even, but with the help of the Sare grant that funded some of the upfront equipment costs. And this is the most exciting part for me because we are interested in farming regeneratively and because we farm in the northern Midwest and we have been certified organic in the past because we were certified and because we know that the 90-day rule and the 120-day rule pretty much preclude the use of livestock in your crops during the growing season. We wanted to sort of demonstrate that this might be able to be done safely, that this might not be a food safety risk. For those who aren't really sure what does everybody know what the 90 and 120-day rules are, right? So this is a national organic program protocol, and this is also a FSMA regulation. We are FSMA exempt because of our size and because of the nature of our customers. But the 90 and 120-day rules are about when you can apply manure to your crops. And the 120-day rule is for soil contact crops. So most of your vegetables are going to be in this. You have to not apply manure within 120 days of harvest, right? The 90-day rule is for non-soil contact crops, which is many of the perennial crops that we grow on our farm. We have a lot of tree fruit, we have a lot of berry bushes, we have a lot of vines. And I'm just going to say up front that while the most encouraging thing of our 2 seasons running ducks in our vineyard is that we've demonstrated that it is not inherently a food safety risk, if you are a lettuce grower and you have ducks, I'm not eating your lettuce, ever. I know what ducks do, right? I know what ducks do. They apply manure. And so this is really a very narrow part of the conversation about the National Organic Program's rules and how they might perhaps be a little more nuanced for those of us who are perennial producers, how we might figure out what are the food safety, good agricultural practices that make running, pooping animals in your perennial crops safe for you and for your consumers. And we also wanted to look at pest control, and it's interesting because we've been in several seasons of drought and haven't had the same insect pressure as we had 5 years ago. And so I can't speak super intelligently about like whether our scouting numbers dropped because I think it was a weirdly insect pest free 2 years. Based on what I've seen ducks do in the field, I think that they are allies against insect pests. And based on what I've heard other growers do with ducks in other crops, I do think that it's worth investigating this as an integrated livestock possibility if you have problems with things like snails, if you have problems with things like Japanese beetles and other pests that have a significant soil-borne part of their life cycle that a duck can help to disrupt. And ultimately, are we still planning to use ducks in our vineyard in the future? Yep, we're putting them out there in about 6 weeks. So yeah, so we're going to do it again. So kind of a niche topic that you're sitting in on, but I think generalizable. I really do. I think that some of the things that we've learned can be helpful about other livestock integration, about grapes in general, and about ducks in general. And I want to say thank you so much to North Central Sare, who made this project possible. This is the information about our project number. And if you haven't tracked Sare grants before, what's really cool about the Farmer Rancher Grant Research Program is that as we who are doing funded projects like this work on our farms, we have to post updates and like mid-project summaries of how are things going, what have we learned so far. So our midpoint project report is already up there on Sare's website. When we're done with the research and we have all of the soil tests in and all of the food safety tests in and the final results, that'll be out there. So there's material that comes out of this work that Sare-funded research does. And if you aren't familiar with Sare-funded research, check out their website. This is a real opportunity for those of us who are trying new, potentially generalizable things on our farms to get some funding to help make that happen. I'm going to stop for questions after we get through the what we did part, and then I'm going to do the what we learned part, and then I'm going to stop for questions again, and then I'm going to do the how to do it part, and then I'm going to stop for questions again. Sound like a plan? Cool. So why did we do this? Why did we do this? Partly for deeply held philosophical and theological values. We really believe in farms that take advantage of the elegance that seems to be designed into the world around us. That I have problems in the forms of weeds and insect pests and low fertility, and non-human creatures naturally are the solutions. It's almost like it was supposed to work that way, right? So this is what we're already doing on our farm. We've already been running our chickens under our apple orchards in the hope of breaking the plum curculio pest cycle. We already run goats in our cover crops. They knock our sorghum Sudan grass down when we're prepping a field. They manage our brush. They're eating the buckthorn out of our woodlot. So we're integrating livestock. And this quote from Wendell Berry sort of sums it up for me. Once plants and animals were raised together on the same farm, which therefore neither produced unmanageable surpluses of manure to be wasted and to pollute the water supply, nor depended on such quantities of commercial fertilizer, and I'll also say commercial herbicides, commercial insecticides, if I can edit Wendell Berry, that was brazen. The genius of America's farm experts is very well demonstrated here. We take a solution and divide it neatly into two problems, right? Animals in one place, crops in another place, and then we need what they both have to offer to the ecology, but we don't integrate them. So at our farm, we're trying to integrate livestock whenever it seems practical, whenever it seems useful, whenever it strikes us as particularly elegant, and in some cases even when it seems entertaining. So that's kind of the why of what we're doing. And again, because we are interested in the conversation broadly about, is this safe? Can we feed our communities with an integrated livestock program without running the risk of pathogens and that sort of stuff? Can we do this? We wanted to be part of that conversation in a really applied, proactive way. And I want to say thanks again to Sare, because One of the things we were super tempted to do at the very beginning was to use sheep in our vineyard to manage the vegetation. And we know a couple people who have done that, but when we were going through the Sare-funded projects looking for who's done some cool stuff out there with animals in their vineyard, we found this here is from Sare Grant Project FNC 19-1193, and I would like to thank Cammie. I don't know if Cammie is in the room, but she tried running sheep in her vineyard and learned that it is not possible. Right? They even had in this project, they had these special muzzles that were for sheep in vineyards. They were developed in New Zealand, and they make it so that when the animal's head is down, it can graze grass, but when the animal lifts its head, it can't browse the sprouts of new growth on your vines. And Cammie, in that Sare project, was like, probably no, don't try this, because she came home from a trip and her neighbor's vines had been stripped of 60% of that year's growth. So we were like, okay, no sheep. Okay, so sheep are out. The other thing about sheep is they don't control insect pests, right? And one of the things when we bought our farm in 2019, one of the things that was really alarming to us was the map that the Minnesota Department of Agriculture puts out that sort of charts the westward march from the metro of Japanese beetles. And so, you know, the defoliation that Japanese beetles causes isn't like always catastrophic, but it's not something that a vine grower wants, because they will munch all your stuff, right? So we wanted something that would control the beetles. And we also know that even though vineyard snails aren't generally a problem in Minnesota's vineyards, we know that they exist in places in the Midwest. And with the changing climate, you know, who knows in the next 10, 15 years what kinds of new insect pests we might be facing, and sheep aren't going to help with that. You might say, well, why not chickens? We've been familiar with chickens. We've successfully used chickens under our apple orchards. Here are the 3 reasons that chickens weren't something we were willing to try in our vineyard. The first thing is that chicken manure is quite hot. It's hotter than duck manure is in terms of its nitrogen content. And so duck poop tends to run a little bit cooler. And if you're going to be having it as raw manure, it's maybe not going to run the risk of, you know, damaging your plants. The other thing about chickens is that their scratching habits tend to thrash the root zones of your perennial plants. And if you have an established standard size apple tree, that apple tree is going to hold up to chicken scratching. But if you have a 3-year-old grapevine and you have chickens in the root zone of that grapevine, it's maybe not going to be a good look. And then the third thing is, because I've seen this with my own eyes, chickens fly and they have little gribby feet that just land up in your trellis system and they eat your grapes. So chickens were also a no-go. So then, ducks. Ducks it is. So we are not the first people to try ducks in our vineyards. This is actually an established practice. There are some small farms in Northern California that we know have been using them. And there is a famous farm, a vineyard in South Africa that has, I couldn't track down how much acreage they have under vines, but they have 1,000 ducks. And they just let them out to work the vineyards every single day up until like X period before harvest. And those ducks are eating all of the pests. In South Africa, their number 1 pest is going to be a vineyard snail. So the ducks are cleaning it up. Also, you have to buy tickets several months in advance to watch the ducks go to work every day. So it's an agritourism kind of thing. You can go and watch the parade of adorable ducks going out into the vineyards there in South Africa. Ducks, they have completely different habits, right? They don't scratch, they flap with like little flappy feet. And so they just sort of mat the vegetation down. They don't tend to destroy the soil. They do dabble I love it. Did you guys know that, like, the verb dabble, like, you know, when you say, oh, I'm dabbling this or dabbling in that, it's because ducks are like, there might be something in here, I'm just gonna quick make a little hole and like make a mucky little mess out of it, and then they're like, oh, nope, there wasn't really anything in there, so I think I'll go over here. And so it's like, you're gonna be in different places in the soil. You're gonna start in one place and be in another place, and not continually work spots of soil so that you have, you know, air pruning of roots or like damage to your plants. And ducks are, most domestic ducks are flightless. So they can't get your grapes, which is kind of cool. As I mentioned, they have cooler manure in general. So we went with ducks, and I also I took home the class ducklings in second grade, and I thought, well, I mean, how much harder could this be? There were 2 ducklings in second grade. So here were the guiding questions in our research project as we submitted them to Sare for funding. Is this useful? Are ducks actually useful? Are they going to do vegetation management for us? Are they going to improve soil fertility? Are they going to control insect pests? And what do you need in order to do it, to make it so that your daily labor isn't significantly increased? So how are you going to do this, especially in a northern climate? Because I'm going to point out that those 2 examples of doing this in Northern California, in Marin and Sonoma and places like that, it is a temperate climate, and wintering ducks over is not a big deal. And the ducks can go out to work almost every day that you want them to because of the climate. Here, you got to think about, like, what am I going to do with them in the winter? Am I going to harvest them? What's going to happen? So, what's going to be practical here in a northern climate? Can this be made cost-effective from eggs and meat? Is that possible? And what's an ideal stocking density? What's an ideal rotation cadence to move them through your vineyard? And then, most importantly, is this safe? Is this safe, or does it have risks that we don't want to live with? So, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the vineyard so you can kind of imagine where these questions are being answered. Again, we're beginning farmers. We're starting our 6th season this year, so it has been a steep learning curve, kind of like when roller coasters go upside down, like that kind of a learning curve. But the vineyard was established when we bought the farm, which is great because it was mature and producing. It also wasn't planted in the way that perhaps we would have planted it, right? Like somebody else got to carry out their vineyard dreams. We're in Zone 4B that did not change this year with the USDA's reassigning of zones. It's about 1 acre of grapes. It's an eastern-facing slope. Nice sandy loam soil, although it is the poorest soil on the farm, which is kind of interesting. And it was under corn for at least 60 years, maybe more. And when the prior farmers put grapes in, they didn't do field prep. And they didn't pay attention to what was going on with the soil after 60 plus years of corn. They just kind of trenched and put vines in. It's gone relatively well, considering. And so we have about 590 vines, and we have 23 varieties, which is, if you're interested in grapes, more varieties than I would suggest you put in. The prior farmer liked variety and thought, well, maybe if he was going to farm there until he died, he'd be able to eventually pick his favorites and then narrow it down and replant rows with the ones that he thought were successful. But we still have 23 varieties of both wine grapes and table grapes. And afterwards, I would love to talk, if anybody's like, what kind of varieties are you really enjoying? What's been worth your while? I'd love to talk varieties. They are on a 6-foot high wire cordon trellis. They're in double rows. When we bought the farm, that wasn't the case. When we bought the farm, the prior farmer had, if you can kind of imagine this, wires in double rows at 3 feet, and then wires in double rows again at 6 feet. And so there was sort of, there's a training method called Geneva curtain, which takes advantage of being able to have high and low growing cordons. And so what was happening in our vineyard was that every vine had a cordon that grew one direction at 3 feet and a cordon that grew another direction at 6 feet, and the next vine did the same thing, what that created was too dense a vegetative canopy. In our typically damp, typically fungus-ridden climate, that's just too much green growth. You're not going to get air movement through your vines, and you're going to see a lot more incidents of black rot, I think a lot more sour rot in your bunches and things like that, just because you can't move air through to dry things out. So we took out everything that was at 3 feet. We cut all of that. We cut all of those cordons off, and we retrained the vines to only run at 6 feet. I'll just say up front that did wonders. It's hard to know when we get another super wet year if it will help enough. That did wonders for our fungal disease pressure. Just to lift the vines up and away from the soil where the splashback from the rain is going to be the vector for getting all of that funk onto your plants. So we're running things at a 6-foot high wire. The vineyard is under plastic mulch, and I know a lot of my annual vegetable farmer friends, plastic mulch is a blessing. It cuts way back on herbicide use. I just want to say, I'm going to put this out there, for folks growing perennially, I would look for something other than plastic mulch. If you leave that stuff in place and don't pull it up like annual growers do at the end of a season, if you lay that stuff in place, we've discovered two things. One, the edges start to kind of give out and you get a bunch of weed creep into your perennial spaces. And then actually weeding is impossible once it has kind of poked its way through that plastic mulch that you're leaving in place season after season. And the other thing is that it starts to degrade. I don't know if it's the UV or whatever, but when we pull those up, microplastics are degrading into the top 2 inches of our soil. And so when we pull this up, we're like taking microfibers out of our plastic. We've also done some perk tests on our plastic mulch, and I know that the manufacturers say that they're permeable, that they allow water and air to pass, but if you actually go out there and do a perk test on this plastic, we had a 2 liters of water sit in place for 8 minutes, and it didn't go through that mulch. And in drought conditions, that's not acceptable for us. That we need some other solutions. We're currently removing plastic mulch and replacing it with wood chip mulch, which no vine grower in California would ever do. But it's the best thing we can think of to kind of keep some of our weeds suppressed in the rows, where it's perilous to weed whip, because a weed whip can take out a young grapevine in like a second. So that's kind of about our vineyard.
What thickness of wood chips are you?
What thickness? 8 inches.
8 inches?
Yeah. So we're doing about 8 inches of wood chip mulch. This year, if we can afford it, I'm going to try to lay paper first and then wood chip mulch. The paper might last for 3 seasons. I think it's going to give us a real head start. We happen to have a grape expert in the room, and so if you want to check in, you can ask about why people wouldn't mulch. But my understanding is, in general, grapes don't want their root zones kept too cool. And then 8 inches of wood chip mulch is going to keep their roots kind of cool, and it's going to affect the fruit development during the season. So here's our vineyard, and learn from us here the questions that you might want to ask yourself if you're thinking about any livestock integration with your crops. Then you might want to ask, where's your hydrant? Where's your nearest water supply? And what would it cost to get water to your vineyard? In particular, if you're going to do something like have animals out there, because you're going to need it. What ground cover are you going to use in your rows, in your aisles? And what's adjacent to your vineyard? For a number of reasons, that's a good thing to know. And then, if you could plan ahead, what trellis and row configuration would work for the animals that you want to integrate? So this is our farm from the sky. This whole area right here is inside a 10-foot deer fence, which is kind of the only way I could imagine growing fruit ever, is with a deer fence. And this is our vineyard. This is our vineyard right here. And the last third we're dedicated to research. We specifically did the last third for two reasons. One, we wanted to see some soil fertility improvement out there. And two, we didn't want to put duck poop where people would go through the duck poop to get to clean rows, right? And so we put the research dirty rows on the farthest end of the vineyard. We're next to a bunch of CRP wetland that was replanted in native prairie, and that's what has affected the kinds of weeds that we're seeing as weed pressure in our vineyard, because we're right up against that CRP land. It's awesome for land-based predators, and I'll talk about that in a second when I talk about like other stuff we learned that wasn't actually part of the research questions. Yeah.
How hard is it to sell the duck eggs?
Not hard. Not hard, no. In fact, we have customers who drive to our farm to get duck eggs because they don't know where else to get them.
So labor is minimal.
Yeah. Well, labor is not minimal when we talk about egg washing, and I'm going to talk about that in on a future slide.
How many ducks did you have?
So we had, at one point, the most we had was 60, and then we sort of plateaued at 40. And these are good segue questions into the other stuff that we didn't need to learn, but we learned anyways. Yeah?
And how much land are you managing with that number of ducks? Like half acre, quarter acre?
So it's about, it's between a fifth and a quarter of an acre. And it's probably, it's like 100, or I'm sorry, 1,200 row feet. Of grapevines. Yeah.
Was there a cost to ducks to purchase them?
Yes, there was a cost to the ducks to purchase them. The flock that we ran the first season, we had, and I'll talk about that because we intended to purchase more breeding stock, but there was an avian flu outbreak. So we didn't. But you can get Ancona ducklings for between $4 and $6, depending on whether you get them straight run or sexed. So just to tell you some stories about stuff that we didn't actually need to learn, but we learned anyways. So if you were going to do this, and if you don't already have grapevines, you would kind of have to think ahead about, if I'm going to have animals and all of the equipment and stuff that comes with animals in my vineyard, how can I plan for that? Because we had to do a bunch of remediation. So you remember those 3-foot trellis wires that I was telling you about? The electric fencing is 48 inches tall. And so the first season, we hadn't taken those, we had retrained the vines, but we were still using those low wires to keep the vertical trunk of every vine stable. We hadn't taken those 3-foot high wires out. It is impossible to fence in a way that's sane when you're like, well, there's a 3-foot wire here, my fence is 4 foot tall. This row is 170 feet long, I got 100-foot row or roll of fence. It's like more geometry than I have had to do since 8th grade to figure out what's the most sensible, efficient way to fence these ducks and to move them along. So we had to remove the 3-foot trellis wires from the research rows so that we could accommodate the electric netting that keeps the ducks safe from predators. Also, the plastic mulch. Again, we're removing plastic mulch from all of our perennials on the farm. It's just not worth it in terms of it stops the water from going through, it biodegrades. We're also kind of wondering if we're trying to farm regeneratively, right? And we're trying to rebuild the microbiology of our soil. How's that going to happen with a layer of plastic in place? Like, how are we going to make meaningful impacts on the top, 2-4 inches of topsoil if it's under a plastic barrier? I'm really curious about that. And some people might have had success with that, but we haven't really figured it out. So we've been taking the plastic mulch out. Taking the plastic mulch out is miserable work. It's like super hard because when you've left it in place for the 5 years of its OMRI-certified lifespan, it's gotten all grown in. There's roots. Animals have taken part of it and like made nests out of it. So it's like woven into the ground. And it's probably cost us, I don't know, about $500 in tipping fees in our landfill to get rid of this plastic mulch. So I'm not stoked about it, and I would not recommend it for your vineyard personally. There might be other growers who love it, and talk to them about it. There were a couple of days where we came out, and in the morning we found a dead bird, and it wasn't really obvious what had gotten it, and we were like, oh man. And so we were like testing the fence to make sure it was running hot. Came out the next morning, found another dead bird, and we were like, what's happening? And then we realized it was, that we have a nesting pair of great horned owls. And so this significantly impacts duck keepers. Rachel and I were having a really good breakfast conversation about how you have to go out and put your ducks to bed. They do not roost like chickens, and they actually would prefer to sleep in the open, and the open is where owls are. And so, and you saw those kind of tufts of blue stem growing up in our vineyard. They wanted to sleep there. They were like, this is perfect. And so every evening I have added 15 minutes of my time to go all the way out to my vineyard, which is in the corner of our farm, and to put everybody to bed. Now it's kind of adorable because if you sing to them, you can train them to go to sleep. So I can sing, night, night, duck, ducks. Night, night, duck, ducks, and they all line up in a row. Night, night, duck, ducks, it's time to go to bed. And they all line up and they go in their little coop, and I shut the door. They will not do that on their own. And you'll lose birds to owls. So that's what we learned that way. The drought was hard on us because we could barely keep up with the irrigation needs on our farm. And I think that what's interesting is the irrigated rows that we have on 18-inch inline emitters that run the lengths of our rows of grapevines, those struggled. The duck rows were lush and green because ducks love water. And I was filling their pool up and filling their water bottles up and like dumping their waterers out. So we learned that drought is hard even on grapevines, even though they like dry, hot weather. They were lush. There was a lot more vegetative growth in the places where the ducks were because we were irrigating them differently. Also, labor it was just way more than we had thought it would be. And the whole farm was understaffed, and anybody else. The whole farm was understaffed last year and the year before, and so it just added a lot. It added a lot. It was one of those things where it's like, why am I doing this? And then the avian influenza outbreak led us to decide not to purchase breeding stock that year, because that was the spring where like some of the hatcheries were like, we're not going to ship across state lines in case the regulations start to change, so we couldn't get new breeding stock. So instead we bred some of our Swedish black ducks with our Ancona ducks, and we have our own little barnyard breed of pretty healthy ducks. So we learned a lot year one. Also, year two, there were more owls, and I'll just say that my wife actually rescued a duck from the clutches of the great horned owl. Like, she went out there, I was like, Jen, did you put the ducks to sleep? She was like, ooh, I forgot. It was kind of dark, and she like went out there, and was like, the owl was there with the duck, and she like had to like, shoo the owl off and rescue the duck. And we're softies, so we take really good care of them in duck hospital for a while, and she's okay, that hen's all right. But yeah, so year two in terms of storytelling, so the things that we didn't need to learn is like how hard it is to take care of ducks over the winter. They need water all the time. They have to have water to put their whole head into. If they can't clean their eyes and their nose out, they can suffocate because they can't breathe unless their nose holes are open. They can't breathe through their mouth, it doesn't work. And their eyes don't have the same kind of mechanism as other animals. They're waterfowl, so they're supposed to be splashing in water all day long. So that's really hard in the winter. We've had to have a heated waterer, and that's affected our electricity bill over the winter. But the hoop coops that we made, we're pretty stoked. We took the canvas off, and I'll talk more about the equipment in just a little bit. We took the canvas off and replaced it with the old greenhouse plastic from our hoop house. And it's become a little solaria where the ducks spend their whole winter, and they're so chuffed, they love it. These hoop houses are useful across all 4 seasons. There was more HPAI. It made us a little bit nervous. It made us not expand our flock because we didn't want to just run the risk of just losing animals that we put a lot of duckling care time into. And these hoop coops that we use, I'm going to show you in a little bit, these hoop coops that we use aren't the most low-profile, wind-resistant, slick things ever. And we've had probably 5 or 6 incidents of super abrupt straight line winds on our farm, where it goes from like 25 miles an hour to like 65 miles an hour. And we had one of these coops fly over my head and land in a different field. And it was pretty alarming. So the wind has been kind of scary, and the vineyard is probably the most exposed to wind on the farm. More drought. And then this was the hardest part for us this year. Well, we had a drift incident on our farm, and our grapes took a hit across varieties. And so now it's going to be sort of hard to tell what benefits the ducks have had because the dicamba incident has really set our grapevines back. So my science got kind of messed up, as sciencey as I was trying to be. So, and we did kind of wonder too, we thought, should we put the ducks back out there if there's risk of another drift incident from the adjacent cornfields? Because we don't want our ducks to get sick from, I don't know what dicamba and 2,4-D do to ducks, but it can't be good, right? So those were some of the things that we didn't really expect to learn, but we did. All right, I'm going to stop for questions about what we learned. You remember from the first slide that I am going to do it again, right? I mean, I really am. We're going to do it again. So yes, and then yes, and then yes.
Just for clarity, that building that we're looking at, that's where the ducks spend that night?
No, not in the winter. No, that's their solarium during the day. Yeah, so part of the grant we had written to have winterized portable housing, because we have a rolling chicken wagon that makes it super easy to move chickens from block to block to block on our orchard. You don't have to round them up. You just leave them inside there and you tractor the birds where you want them to work next. So in the grant was some winterized portable housing. That hasn't become the pressure point because we do have some winterized housing where the ducks can spend the winter, but it's not portable. We may still construct that in this year during season 3 of this exciting series. But ducks are really easy to move from field to field. They have a flocking instinct, and we just walk them real casual, like from the barnyard all the way out across 6 acres to get to the vineyard in the corner. So moving them inside a wagon isn't like absolutely necessary because we can make them go wherever we want to. They just go. If you try it with chickens, I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Like with chickens, they'll just be everywhere and you're fine. Make sure you have a question.
I have a great question. Is that okay right now?
Yeah, you can try me.
Okay. Did all 23 of your varieties take well to the training system that you switched them to?
Nope.
Okay.
I can tell you about which ones didn't.
Or I was just curious if all of them did, because in our limited experience with grapes and doing a bunch of variety trials and trying one system across them all, that was very.
Yeah, and the odds of failing when you have 23 varieties are definitely higher. Yeah, St. Teresa, Lorelei, Osceola Muscat, absolutely not. Yeah. Did you have a question too?
Yeah, I was curious about what happens with the drift. Is that something that, like, is anybody held responsible for that, or what comes up with that?
So we're learning about that. Again, that's part of the non-refundable tuition that we are paying as beginning farmers. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture is in our corner. They know about this year's drift incident. We didn't have enough data on our end about what happened when and who was out and what the wind direction was to be able to file an effective report. But now that we know that, this year we're gonna keep pretty close to track, especially during those times of the year when we know that our conventional corn growers are out, spraying.
You have to
these.
simply watch them spray.
You kind of do. Yeah, you have to be able to say, here's what I think happened. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture seems ready to absolutely step in on our behalf and do some sleuthing and do some communicating. We're going to do a little preventative communication with our neighbors that we know are adjacent to us. The thing with dicamba, and I'm just starting to learn about this, which by the way only has 1 year left of being sprayed in the United States because it was, thanks be to God, right? It was, the licensure was just removed, but states are deciding what's happening. So people who have dicamba in tanks this year can use whatever stock they have on their farm. You cannot buy more this year. And then next year, you won't be able to spray. And that's gonna make a real difference for us specialty growers. Grapes are exquisitely sensitive to growth regulating herbicides. So dicamba and 2,4-D are gonna torture grapes in the way that they won't really bother some of your other, fruit crops, for example. So we're learning about what we're gonna do in response to this drift incident. Stay tuned. Oh, thanks so much. Yeah.
So when they are out in the vineyard, what are they in, like a chicken type structure overnight, or what is that look like?
Yeah, so you ready to see the stuff?
I'm ready.
So now we get to the product review section and what it takes to do this. So this is what it takes to start ducklings. And if you were going to try to do this in the most cost-effective way, and you just wanted to start ducks every season and then slaughter ducks every season and not bother with overwintering them, you have to start with ducklings, right? And so management of ducklings is going to be like 2 hours of chores. They're super front-loaded. Like ducklings take a lot of care for the first 6 weeks, and then after that, they are so much easier than chickens in terms of like health and in terms of like the trouble they cause and that sort of stuff. Ducks are way easier than chickens. But it's still gonna take you a little while. They need supplementary heat for the first 6 weeks, so you have to plan on that. They're healthier in my experience than chicks have ever been. We lose way fewer ducklings than we lose chicken chicks. But you have to provide them with water, again, to rinse their face off, otherwise they'll die. They can have a niacin deficiency, so you have to supplement niacin, otherwise their legs get wonky. And if they don't have a higher protein starter ration than chicks, you want probably 22, maybe 23% protein to start ducks on at a minimum. Their feathers come in funny. So they're waterfowl, they're different from chickens. They have slightly different nutritional and management needs. But they can work in the vineyard once they're fully feathered out, which for us in this variety was around 9 or 10 weeks old, as long as they're safe with the help of electric netting. And it took us, we just counted on 2 bags of starter to get every 5 ducklings from start to work. You know what I mean? That's kind of how much feed we bought to get them ready to go forage. And we still supplied them with rations, because again, we're trying to raise layer ducks and we want them to be healthy and well fed so that they, 1, are happy and 2, produce eggs. They're super vulnerable to snakes and to aerial predators when they're ducklings. And snakes can sometimes get through an electric fence without getting shock. So just be aware of that. If you got big boys like milk snakes or king snakes or that kind of stuff, they'll eat your ducklings.
Were you starting these ducklings just in a farmyard, or where were they when they were at that stage?
So we had them we brooded them in our garage. So we incubated them in the house. We brooded them in our garage so that we could shut the place down really tight, because rats will eat ducklings too. So we brooded them in our garage. We put them in a grow-out pen. And there's videos of YouTube people everywhere saying I didn't realize that we're gonna have to carry them outside every day. And you kind of do, because they need fresh air and sunlight, and they need to be able to, once their feathers start coming in, they need water to be able to start preening. So we grew them in our grow-out pen that was adjacent to our garage. And then once they couldn't fit through the holes of the electric netting anymore, then we put them out in the field, once they were fully feathered. Any other questions about ducklings? So this is where it starts every season. And then mature ducks, for me on our farm, our vineyard is way the heck out there, so it takes me a little bit to get there, and sometimes I have to think about, we don't have a bulk feed bin, and so I have to get the UTV and throw a couple bags of feed on it, and so that I have it for the feeders and stuff like that. If we had a bulk feed bin, that'd be great. I would just drop it out in the field right by where my ducks are. But it takes me 15 to 30 minutes of chores a day, depending on how hot it is and how much water they need. Again, 5 to 6 ounces of rations. You have to have deep water, and ducks don't lay in nest boxes, not in my experience. They lay where they want to. So every day is like an Easter egg hunt, which is delightful if you have the time. And if ducks lay out in the grass, their eggs stay cleaner than if they lay in the coop. Because if they lay in the coop, then somebody might poop on their eggs. And their eggs have kind of a waxy bloom on them, which makes them a little harder, I find, to wash than chicken eggs. And they don't roost. You're gonna have to round them up every evening. You're gonna have to invent your very own song. And they also need shade. They have tons of down feathers, and they can't manage the heat in the same way that chickens can. They don't dust bathe in the way that chickens can. They get really hot, so they need a shade cloth. Or in our case, the cover provided by the vines wasn't really adequate, you know what I mean? Because we keep those rows pretty narrow, and we do summer pruning, so we had to get some shade cloths out there. Here are the quick equipment reviews. At first we bought this really cool duck waterer. It's a tripod. It takes 8 gallons, and I was like, that's gonna save me chores. No, it totally doesn't, because they swim in it. They like get in there and they totally like bathe in it and swim around in it, and it siphons that water that's got duck poop on it up into the reservoir, and then you're like, I have to dump it out. Anyways, never mind. So go to your local bakery and get a bunch of food grade buckets for free. If you go on Tuesdays, usually done their baking for the week, you get food grade buckets and you just cut holes in the side of them. And then they can fit their whole entire head in there and they can splash around, but they can't get their whole body in there to go poop in it. So we love these. Ducklings can drown in those, so you gotta be careful. If a young duckling got itself in the hole and got tired and couldn't get out, it could drown. It's about this deep in a 3-gallon bucket, so we do have to fill a lot of these. So that's why they only get 4 out of 5 stars. Still, I recommend. We were using cute blue kid pools to give them their water to swim in and to preen in and to wash themselves off in. But these utility sleds that are on clearance right now, these are so awesome because you know how they're like, they're, I don't know, aerodynamic, snow dynamic, and they have that curved bottom. Super easy for someone, even with my upper body strength, to just lift it up and it kind of tips down on that rocking face, and the water just pours right out. And then I hose them out, and then I fill them up again. And so all of that, basically, fertigation just went into my vineyard, which is awesome, and I think it accounts for some of the modest soil improvements that we've seen. And then, when I'm going to move them to the next place, I just hose that sled out, and I pile their feeder and their water in it, and I just drag it over to where we're going next, and then I unpack it, and then we're there. So these are totally worth it. Totally worth it. Solar energized electric net fencing is the only way to go. And for us it had to be solar because our vineyard is so far removed from any source of electricity. Works pretty great. Be careful with ducklings because ducklings can get themselves partway through but then not be able to back out. And they can't get their nice plump little bums through. So watch ducklings with this fence. And get the most solar panel that you can afford for remote applications, and then you get peace of mind. This again keeps away foxes, coyotes. We've never lost anything to an opossum or a raccoon. The only thing we lost our ducks to was the owl. This is where they live in the summer. There are plans for these all over the internet. This is a hoop coop made out of dimensional lumber. It's 8 by 8, and then you take cattle panels. And you just bend them to form, and then you kind of build it out however you want, a door or whatever, and then you put a tarp over the top so that they're protected from the elements. We were doing cheap poly tarps, and they were shredding in those wind incidents, so we switched to canvas. It's lasted us, I mean, like 2 full years, and they're still going. So I highly recommend canvas tarps. They make the whole thing heavier. And it is kind of hard to drag this up and down. It happens that these at 8 feet by 8 feet fit exactly in between our grape rows, like super tight, really, so that we can just drag them right up and down the aisles of our vineyard. The thing about the high profile nature of these do-it-yourself hoop coops is that they catch wind. And this was the coop that went over my head and landed in a different field, which was alarming. So we did have to, out there, start putting earth anchors in. And for the people who have a lot of upper body strength on our farm team, like, that's not a big deal. But for me, that made rotation just stink. Because getting an earth anchor out of the ground is a lot of effort for me. there are these new products out there. I can't like recommend because I haven't tried it, but somebody out there has finally manufactured, for all of us who have followed the YouTube instructions and built these, manufactured something called a chick lift. That's the brand name. It is a pop-on, it's like a wheel that drops down when you step on a lever, and the wheel drops down and lifts the end of the hoop coop up so that then you can just go pull it on a rope like a wheelbarrow. So I'm super excited about this new mom and pop business that started these chick lifts. Because whether you run chickens in these, you can put broilers in these, all kinds of stuff. And you can just move them, it looks like super, super easily. These are the feeders that we're currently using. We just use a Rubbermaid tub. We put Costco-sized peanut butter jars on the side of it. The clear plastic is nice because you can see from pretty far away whether you need to refill the duck's feed or not, and you don't even have to go in and get your boots poopy. But the clear plastic seems to get pretty brittle, maybe from UV exposure, and so sometimes they'll break and then you got feed all over the place. So this year we're going to switch to an opaque trash can that can probably hold maybe 5 or 6 bags, and we'll put some openings in the bottom. There, you do get some wild birds feeding on this, and you do get a little bit of spillage, but this is probably the best way to feed ducks. So we're going to do this again, and some of you who have heard this talk might be like, well, why exactly? But it's because we hope that as we learn and as we kind of make our systems a little bit more efficient, the cost-benefit ratio might continue to kind of tip in our favor. And because we're committed to farming regeneratively, we want these livestock integrations to work, and we're willing to keep trying them until they do. And because even though Japanese beetle has slowed down a little bit, it's still coming for us. You know, it'll still be prevalent in our county probably within the next 5 to 10 years, and we want to be ready for those new insect pests by having systems in place. So in the future, we're going to hopefully increase our flock size and find ideal stocking density. We do want to figure out, are they going to wreck the aisle vegetation over several years, like slowly kill that clover and that fescue off, because we don't want that. We want to have vegetation there. We do want to add Campylobacter to our food safety testing, which is a really expensive food safety test, but it's also one of the pathogens most commonly carried by ducks. So we're going to add Campy, I think, to our food testing in the future. And Annalisa Hultberg was like, well, did you test their poop to see if they have the pathogens? Because maybe you just have very clean ducks. And I hadn't really thought about that, but like, maybe the reason our grapes are squeaky clean is because our ducks are squeaky clean. But then what happens if your ducks have an outbreak of something that ends up being a foodborne pathogen for people? We're going to try to fence in the whole vineyard with perimeter fence. We did not sell birds for meat because plucking a duck takes forever. It doesn't even matter, like we used our regular barrel plucker. No. They have ducks, chickens have like 9,000 feathers on their body, and ducks have like 14,000 feathers on their body, and a bunch of them are little small and they don't really come out of the skin. So if we can find plucking equipment, then we can maybe find out whether meat sales could offset some of the costs. Yeah.
Did you try wax?
We didn't try wax. No.
Great.
Have you done wax?
Wax changes everything.
Wax changes everything.
You see a hot wax tank, cold dip tank, so you do 3 coats, and then you can just rip out all the small feathers. So you have like a barrel plucker that takes off all the big ones, big feathers, and then the wax takes all the little ones that are a real pain to get out.
This is good to know. Wax.
And you can get duck wax specifically, which is extra tacky.
You can get duck wax, which is extra tacky. That is valuable information. Thank you for that. And I think we might want to build just some permanent housing out there. If we're going to keep doing this, and if maybe we're going to do it on all 23 rows of our grapes, maybe we're just going to house ducks out there most of the year. And we are for sure going to charge admission. It's our new agritourism venture for people to come watch the ducks go to work. Wait, it wasn't one of those, hold on, I had a video. Hold on, didn't I have a video? Wait. This is a very, oh yeah, isn't this a video? Oh yeah. This is what I'm going to charge admission for. I have to say, This is my favorite moment of the whole day. There's nothing on the earth that is as happy to be alive as a duck in the morning. So, 100% my favorite moment of the whole day. And I can see why that vineyard in South Africa like sells out of tickets for that. Because ducks are cheerful, they're fun, and I think that maybe they're doing good work. So thanks so much for being here. Does anybody have closing questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ducklings, niacin, what are you using to supplement?
So the cheapest supplement is just brewer's yeast. And you can get that.